The Return of the Deliverer, the Moses Story, Part 2. In the first part of our journey through Moses' extraordinary life, we witnessed the transformation of a Hebrew prince into a desert fugitive, a man who had lost everything he thought defined him. Fleeing into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on his back and the weight of an impossible choice echoing in his heart. Tonight, we continue that story at the moment when Moses thought his life was over, when he believed his destiny had died with the Egyptian taskmaster in the sand. The desert received Moses like a harsh but honest teacher. Gone were the soft linens and rich foods of Pharaoh's palace, replaced by the spare discipline of survival. His feet, once cushioned by marble floors and Persian carpets, grew hard and cracked on desert stone. His hands, once smooth as papyrus scrolls, became rough tools calloused by labor. For 3 days he walked eastward, driven by fear and the basic need to put distance between himself and Pharaoh's reach. The sun was merciless during the day, the cold bitter at night, and water became more precious than all the gold in Egypt's treasuries. His royal robes grew tattered and dust-covered, marking him not as Egyptian nobility, but as just another refugee seeking sanctuary in the borderlands. On the 4th day, when his water was nearly gone and his strength was failing, Moses crested a ridge and saw below him a well surrounded by shepherds and their flocks. The sight was like a vision of paradise. But as he approached, he witnessed a scene that reminded him uncomfortably of the injustices he had fled. 7 young women were trying to water their flocks, but a group of rough shepherds was driving them away, claiming the well for themselves first. The women protested, but they were clearly outnumbered and overpowered. Moses, without thinking, operating on instincts deeper than calculation, he stepped forward. "Let them water their flocks," he said quietly, but his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The shepherds looked at Moses. Something in his bearing convinced them to gather their flocks and move on without confrontation. The women stared at Moses with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. The eldest among them, clearly their leader, stepped forward with a small bow of thanks. "We are grateful for your kindness, stranger. I am Zipporah, daughter of Jethro, priest of Midian. These are my sisters. You have shown us honor when others would not." Moses helped them draw water for their flocks. As they worked, Zipporah studied him. "You are not from Midian," she observed, "nor from any of the neighboring tribes. Your speech marks you as educated, but your hands," she glanced at his soft palms, "are not those of a shepherd or craftsman." "I am a traveler," Moses replied carefully, "seeking a place where the past cannot follow." She nodded. "My father welcomes travelers, especially those who show kindness to his daughters. Will you come and share our evening meal?" The invitation was like water to a man dying of thirst. Jethro's home was a revelation after days in the desert. Built of stone and cedar, it was spacious and comfortable. But what struck Moses most was the atmosphere of peace that pervaded the place. Jethro himself was a man of perhaps 60 years. "So," he said after they had shared bread and goat's milk, "you are the Egyptian who helped my daughters at the well." "I am no Egyptian," Moses replied, the words coming out sharper than he intended. Jethro raised an eyebrow but did not press. "Forgive me," You dress as an Egyptian, speak with an Egyptian accent, and carry yourself with Egyptian bearing. But you say you are not Egyptian. What then shall I call you?" Moses hesitated, then spoke a name he had not used since fleeing Pharaoh's palace. "I am Moses, son of a Hebrew woman." "Ah," Jethro said, "a Hebrew raised in Egypt. That explains much about you. The education, the authority, the sense of justice, but also the restlessness, the weight you carry. You are a man between worlds." Over the following days, as Moses recovered his strength, Jethro proved to be more than a gracious host. He became a teacher, a guide into ways of thinking that Moses had never encountered in either Hebrew tradition or Egyptian philosophy. Jethro's wisdom was practical and profound, rooted in daily experience but reaching toward eternal truths. As weeks turned to months, Moses found himself settling into a rhythm of life he had never imagined possible. He helped tend Jethro's flocks, learning the patient art of shepherding. Moses found himself drawn to Zipporah with an attraction that grew stronger the more he knew her. She was intelligent, strong, beautiful in the way of women who are comfortable in their own skin. She challenged his thinking, laughed at his occasional pomposity, and showed him a kind of love that was both passionate and peaceful. When Moses asked Jethro for Zipporah's hand in marriage, the old priest smiled. "You have my blessing," he said, "but know this, when you marry my daughter, you become my son, not just in law but in truth. Your past, whatever it may have been, is forgiven and forgotten. Your future begins now, in this place, with this family." The wedding was simple but joyful, celebrated under desert stars. As he held Zipporah in his arms that night, Moses felt something he had never experienced before. Not just happiness, but contentment. Not just love, but belonging. Their first son was born a year later, and Moses named him Gershom, meaning, "I have been a stranger in a strange land." For 40 years, Moses lived this life of careful tending and patient wandering. His hair grew gray and his face lined by sun and wind. He became a man of the margins, comfortable with silence, familiar with solitude. Gershom grew strong and wise under the desert sun, learning his father's trade and his grandfather's wisdom. But sometimes in the deep quiet of desert nights, Moses told his son stories of another life, another people. Tales of Abraham's faith, Isaac's sacrifice, Jacob's wrestling with God, and Joseph's rise from slavery to salvation. "These are your people too," Moses would say, "though you may never see them. They are your heritage, even here in Midian." As the years passed, Moses sometimes wondered about the Hebrew slaves still laboring under the Egyptian sun. Their faces haunted his dreams occasionally, and he found himself praying to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. On a morning that began like countless others, Moses led Jethro's flock toward the western side of the wilderness, toward Mount Horeb, the mountain that local people called God's mountain, though none could say exactly why. As they rounded a familiar rocky outcropping, Moses saw something that made him stop walking entirely. A bush was burning, but it was not consumed. The flames danced through the branches with impossible beauty, bright as sunset but casting no smoke, roaring with silent fire that seemed to sing rather than devour. Moses had seen countless desert fires during his 40 years in Midian. Lightning strikes, carelessly dropped embers, the spontaneous combustion of sun-dried brush. But this was different. This was fire that burned without fuel, light that illuminated without destroying. Moses felt his pulse quicken with a recognition he couldn't name, and then he heard it, his name spoken by a voice that seemed to come from the flames and from his own deepest heart simultaneously. "Moses, Moses." The sound stopped him mid-step. This voice was not human, and it carried an authority that made his bones vibrate like tuning forks. "Here I am," he replied, the words coming from some instinctive place beyond thought. "Do not come any closer. Remove your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground." Moses knelt and unlaced his worn shepherd sandals, feeling the warm desert stone against his feet. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed by terror and recognition combined. This was the God of the promises, the God of the covenant, the God whose name his Hebrew mother had whispered over his cradle 80 years ago. "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt." The voice continued, and Moses felt each word like a weight settling on his shoulders. "I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the land of Egypt and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" Moses asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who am I that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" "I will be with you," came the answer. "And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." But Moses pressed further. "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" The answer came like thunder and whisper combined. "I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" Even divine encounters do not always overcome human fear. Moses found himself arguing with the voice from the bush. His speech was slow and halting. How could he possibly convince Pharaoh or inspire a people? He was better with sheep than with words, more comfortable in solitude than in the halls of power. God listened to his protests with infinite patience, providing signs to accompany his words. Moses' staff became a serpent and returned to wood at his command. His hand became leprous white and was instantly healed. Water poured on the ground would become blood. These were not mere magic tricks, but symbols of the authority that would back his mission. Demonstrations that the same power that created fire without fuel could work through an aging shepherd to accomplish the impossible. When Moses continued to resist, pleading for God to send someone else, the divine voice carried a note that sounded remarkably like divine exasperation. "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do." And so Moses returned to Jethro to ask permission to leave, carrying within him the burning memory of the bush and the weight of an impossible mission. "Go in peace," Jethro said simply, "The God who has called you will be with you." The desert had changed Moses, but Aaron recognized him instantly when they met in the wilderness between Midian and Egypt. The brothers embraced with the fierce joy of reunion and the sobering weight of shared destiny. Moses shared the vision of the burning bush, the divine commission, the impossible task that lay ahead. Aaron listened with the understanding of one who had remained among the people, who knew their suffering intimately, who had prayed for deliverance without knowing it might come through his long-lost brother. His words were smooth where Moses's were halting, his confidence strong where Moses felt weak. Together, they formed a partnership that neither could have managed alone. The Egypt they entered was both familiar and strange. Pharaoh was not the same man who had sought his life. That king had died decades ago. But the new ruler seemed cut from the same cloth of absolute power and divine pretension. When Moses and Aaron first appeared before this Pharaoh with their impossible demand, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go," his laughter echoed off the palace walls with the same dismissive arrogance Moses remembered from his youth. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." What followed was a contest between the power that claims to be absolute and the power that actually is. Plague after plague fell upon Egypt. The Nile turned to blood, frogs covered the land, gnats swarmed from the dust, flies darkened the sky. Each catastrophe was both judgment and invitation, a demonstration that the gods of Egypt were not gods at all, but human constructions powerless before the creator of heaven and earth. Moses watched Pharaoh's heart harden with each miracle, as if the very signs that should have convinced him instead drove him deeper into stubborn pride. The plagues escalated. Livestock died, boils broke out on man and beast, hail destroyed the crops, locusts devoured what remained, and darkness covered the land for 3 days. But still Pharaoh refused, caught in the grip of a pride that preferred destruction to admission of error. The final plague was the most terrible, the death of the firstborn throughout Egypt. But even in judgment, God provided a way of escape. Hebrew families were instructed to mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb, and death would pass over their homes. They were to eat the Passover meal in haste, dressed for travel, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Moses, now recognized as the undisputed leader of his people, moved among the Hebrew homes that night, ensuring each family understood the instructions, comforting the fearful, preparing them for the morning that would either bring liberation or catastrophe. When dawn broke and wails of grief rose from every Egyptian household, from the palace of Pharaoh to the prison of the captive, the king who had refused to let Israel go finally released his grip on their lives. "Rise up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel," he commanded through tears and rage. "Go, serve the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds and be gone." The exodus began not with triumph, but with haste. 600,000 Hebrew men, plus women and children, and a mixed multitude of others who chose freedom over familiar bondage, gathered their possessions and began the greatest migration in human history. They had been slaves that morning. By evening, they were a nation in motion. following the pillar of cloud that went before them by day, and the pillar of fire that guided them by night. But freedom, as Moses had learned in the wilderness, is rarely a straight path. Pharaoh's heart proved as changeable as desert weather. After the grief of losing his firstborn son, anger reasserted itself. Why had he let his entire slave workforce simply walk away? Who would build his monuments, work his fields, maintain his empire? 3 days into the wilderness, Egyptian chariots thundered in pursuit, the finest military force in the known world, bearing down on a crowd of former slaves with their children and livestock, their elderly and infirm, their hastily gathered possessions, and their newly minted freedom. The people found themselves trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea. The impossible situation revealed how fragile their faith still was, how quickly they could turn from worship to accusation. Is it because that there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? They cried to Moses. What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Fear not, he told them. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. The Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Then as the Egyptian chariots grew closer, and the people's panic reached its peak, Moses lifted his staff over the Red Sea, the same staff that had become a serpent before Pharaoh, that had brought plagues upon Egypt, that had been carved from desert wood and worn smooth by 40 years of shepherding, now became the instrument of the greatest miracle in human history. The waters parted like curtains drawn back to reveal a hidden stage. A path of dry ground appeared through the depths of the sea, walls of water rising on either side, held back by the same power that had spoken light into darkness at the beginning of time. The people walked through on dry ground, 600,000 men plus women and children, their flocks and herds, their wagons and belongings, all passing safely through the depths of the sea, while the pillar of cloud held back the Egyptian army. Moses walked with them. When the last Hebrew had crossed safely and the Egyptians pursued into the seabed, Moses stretched out his hand again. The waters returned with devastating finality, covering chariots and horsemen and the pride of Pharaoh's army. The threat that had haunted Hebrew nightmares for generations was swept away in a single, irrevocable moment. On the far shore, as the bodies of their former oppressors washed up on the beach, the people burst into songs of celebration. Miriam, Moses' sister, who had watched his basket float among the reeds 80 years before, took up her tambourine and led the women in dances of victory. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. At Mount Sinai, the same mountain where Moses had encountered the burning bush, God descended in fire and smoke to give the people his law. The 10 Commandments thundered from the peak, while the people trembled below, and Moses climbed into the divine cloud to receive the fuller revelation that would become the Torah. For 40 days and nights he remained on the mountain, receiving instruction in justice and mercy, learning the intricate balance between divine holiness and human frailty. Among these divine instructions was the command to build the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred chest of acacia wood overlaid with gold, topped with a mercy seat where God promised to meet with Moses and speak to him. When he descended, carrying the stone tablets written by the finger of God, his face shone with reflected glory, a light so intense that the people could not look directly at him. But human nature proved as stubborn as Pharaoh's heart. While Moses was on the mountain, the people had fashioned a golden calf and were worshiping it with the fervor they should have reserved for the God who had just delivered them from Egypt. Moses' anger burned hot as he saw their betrayal, and he shattered the tablets at the foot of the mountain. Yet even judgment carried the seeds of mercy. God provided new tablets, renewed the covenant, and continued the long work of transforming a collection of former slaves into a holy nation. For 40 years they wandered in the wilderness, a generation dying off and a new one being born, learning the hard lessons of freedom and responsibility. They grumbled about the food, complained about the leadership, and occasionally tried to return to Egypt. But slowly, gradually, they were becoming a people capable of inheriting the promise. Moses led them through it all. But Moses himself never entered the promised land. After leading the people for 40 years through wilderness wandering, after interceding for them countless times, after giving them law and love and his entire life, he was permitted only to see the land from afar. On Mount Nebo, with the promised territory spread out below him like a living map, Moses felt the strange peace of completion. His work was finished. The Hebrew slaves who had cowered under Egyptian whips were gone, replaced by a generation that had never known bondage, that had been shaped by wilderness and law and the constant presence of the divine. The baby who had floated in a basket among the reeds had become the shepherd of a nation, the one who spoke with God face to face, the lawgiver whose influence would reshape human civilization. Moses died alone on Mount Nebo, and the Bible tells us that no one knows where he is buried. Moses' story reminds us that God's timing is not our timing, that preparation often looks like ordinary life lived with extraordinary faithfulness, and that the greatest adventures begin not when we feel ready, but when we finally say yes to the voice that has been calling our name all along. The story never really ends. It just waits for the next chapter to begin, for the next unlikely hero to hear their name called from the flames that burn but do not consume. Rest well, knowing that even in sleep, the pillar of fire continues to burn, guiding us toward promises we may not live to see, but helping to make possible for those who come after us.